Well, good morning, everybody. We might have some other people joining us, but want to welcome Carolyn White and one or more of her students who are joining us today to talk a little bit about MSU Museum's CoLab studio and an exhibit they have right now that's I think will be of interest to some of you. And Carolyn White is the Education and Learning Manager for MSU CoLab Studio. And I'm just going to hand it over. We're going to have a little presentation. It's the first Wednesday of the month. Well, after their presentation, we'll have a chance for some Q&A and some dialogue, which I know we're all fond of. And next month, we have Wendy Fry, thanks to Sam's referral, who will talk about cemeteries and passive recreation. So thank you, Sam, for your networking on that. But without further ado, Carolyn, welcome, and I'm going to let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Leroy. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen really quickly, and we'll get started. Oh, hold on. Give me 1 second.
There's no rush. We have people still tuning in, so take your time.
All right. All right, can you all see that screen? It told me it paused for a second. All right. So we should be okay. All right, so as Leroy mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about the MSU Museum, specifically our 1.5 Celsius exhibition. And I will just briefly give a little bit of an overview about some of the work that the museum is doing and what the CoLab studio focuses on. And then I will hand it over to my students, Kelsey and Hermant, to do a little bit of a virtual engagement with some of the content within the exhibition itself. So, the mission, oh my goodness. Technical difficulties for me this morning. I apologize. So the mission of the MSU Museum really focuses on serving the Michigan State University community by facilitating and creating experiences at the nexus of art, science, cultures, and technologies. And so this is all, if you haven't been to the MSU Museum in a while, we have a new 5-year strategic plan. This is a little bit of a shift from kind of the strictly natural science and cultural collections focus to becoming a little bit more of an interdisciplinary museum that is focused kind of on the bringing art into the conversation just as much as some other spaces. Kelsey, I see your hand.
Hey, Caroline, do you want me to try and share my screens? That way we can get those visuals up there since it's not working for you.
Yeah, it's so strange. It's saying that it's paused whenever I go to
mine says loading.
Perfect. So Kelsey, if you want to go ahead and share.
I will do that. Let's see. Can everyone see the visual?
This is truly demonstrating CoLab Studio here, collaboration.
Collaboration, exactly.
We really try our best to work as a team.
Thank you, Kelsey. So again, kind of focused just on that interdisciplinary nature of it. And so if you move to the next slide, Kelsey, a little bit about what the CoLab focuses on is really serving as an innovative laboratory to explore new methods of designing and implementing programming, informal learning, community engagement. And so a lot of what we do is experimental, is very collaborative in nature, and is really exploratory. And I think for me, and the way our team thinks a lot about the content within the museum is in what ways is it becoming a space for conversation, a space for community, a space for dialogue around interesting, challenging, difficult questions, which brings us to the next slide, which is 1.5 Celsius. So a little bit about 1.5 Celsius, because if you haven't been to the museum in a while, this exhibition's a little bit different than sometimes typical museum spaces. Part of that is the approach that we take to designing it. So the CoLab studio exhibitions are designed through what we call an open call process. And so once a year, we put out a call for proposals, and anyone is welcome to submit their ideas. Students, faculty, community members, partners. We get a whole range of submissions. We typically average about 200. And from those 200 submissions, they are reviewed not by a single curator, but by a curatorial team. So that includes disciplinary experts, that includes members of our staff, and it includes our members of our student team as well. And so we put out the call for 1.5 focused on climate change. We, of course, wanted to focus on that for a variety of reasons. It, as this group knows, is a very pressing, important issue that we need to focus on and address. And it's particularly relevant and difficult for our students as well. This is not something that is going to impact them 100 years from now. It'll happen very quickly, and we see the effects of it already within our lifetime. So it's an issue that we know is important to our students. It's important to us to have a conversation around it as well. And so what 1.5 does in terms of exploring the climate crisis is really looking at it through an artistic as well as a scientific lens. So we have pieces such as the one here that is really kind of focused on sharing kind of the data of carbon impacts, is a little bit more, I would say, science heavy, and not in a bad way, of course, but really emphasizes the research happening around climate change. And we also have pieces that are a little bit more speculative. So as we were looking through the different proposals, we've kind of noticed, or what we ended up with the content in the exhibition focusing on is really three what we call sub-themes. So we have a lot of works that look at the interdependence between humans and nature. Specifically, and I know Harmont and Kelsey will talk about this piece a little bit, so I won't spoil it too much. Looking at kind of the ways that we're caring for kind of animals, caring for nature too. Oftentimes, I think the way we talk about the climate crisis can be very human-centric and human-focused. And so it's about kind of also caring about the impact of what animals, plants, environments are going to be lost in that experience, and prioritizing their needs just as much as our own. There are also pieces that are focused what we call on imagined futures. So they take kind of the basis of the trajectory where we're headed with climate, and they speculate of what are our lives, what are our experiences, what are our resources going to be like? If we kind of continue on the trajectory we're on, what could life look like from that? And so it takes more of an artistic interpretation based on data. And then there's pieces that really focus on sustainable solutions. So what are tools, resources, technologies that we could implement that are going to make a difference? And what are some things we can do individually and collectively to shape the impact for that? So Kelsey, if you want to advance. Again, kind of more of the artistic dialogue focus you can see here. Kelsey, if you want to continue to click. So seeing people kind of engage in conversation and dialogue is a really big focus for us, which brings us to the next slide, which is the collaborators. So the collaborators is the student team that I work with and manage within the CoLab studio. It's also something that is distinct about this exhibition model. And so collaborators are typically undergraduate students, but we have grad students as well, that are really meant to facilitate dialogue and conversation around the themes of the exhibition. So when you walk in, they will be in that space there to really prompt reflection and engagement. Something I would think that makes the collaborators a little bit distinct from docents is that focus on dialogue. So we don't script what they say coming into that experience. We have students from a variety of disciplines and experiences across campus, and we encourage them to bring kind of those interests and the questions they have for visitors into that space. And it's also meant to be really interactive and engaging too. So I like to emphasize that the collaborator experience is just as much a learning experience for the students as it is for visitors, because oftentimes you have people that walk in and share additional information or their experiences and continue to build on the collaborators' knowledge. So I also encourage them to say, I don't know when they don't know, and to use that as a talking point with visitors as well. So it makes that exhibition experience a social one just as much as a learning one. And with that said, I will hand things over to Harmont and Kelsey to first introduce themselves and then to do a little bit of a dialogue and conversation around some of the works that we have in 1.5.
Armand, do you want to start since you're going to go first?
Yeah, sure. Hello, I'm Harmont, and I'm currently a junior here at Michigan State. I am studying human bio, which is very exciting, anatomy. And I actually really enjoy being part of the CoLab studio because, like Caroline has said, to me, it's really the perfect blend of science and art, which I both have a huge passion for. They've both been really integral, not only in my life, but also the career path that I'm choosing. And they've meant a lot to me throughout the years and have helped me through some rough times. So this exhibit really does combine both disciplines in a way that no other exhibit really can.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelsey. I am a senior here at Michigan State. I'm double majoring in biomedical laboratory diagnostics and neuroscience with a minor in cognitive science. I enjoy working at the MSU Museum in the CoLab studio. I enjoy, educating people about our pieces and getting to hold a discussion around climate change and having them educate me as well, as Caroline mentioned earlier.
Do you mind going to the next slide? So we wanted to give you guys a little bit of a virtual tour since you can't be in person to see the different exhibits. I personally chose Community Bee Clinic to talk about. And as Caroline kind of mentioned, it's the idea of caring for animals that are dealing with climate change and not just focusing on the humans. So it's kind of this idea started in a lab at UCSD, which I think was very wonderful. And a lot of the times bees are kind of unnoticed or people are afraid of bees. I used to actually be really afraid of bees before this exhibit. And the exhibitors kind of made it so that we focus in and zoom in on the bees and really see how harmless they are. Because as as some of you may know, I don't want to assume, of course, that bees, if they sting once, they die. And so they really don't want to harm those around them. They only do it as a self-defense mechanism. And this is really exploring how we can care for the bees that are currently in our environment. Even though they're technically invasive species, they came from Europe about 100 to 200 years ago. They have made an integral improvement in our environment and are a huge portion of not only pollination, but also the ecosystem around us. So if you can see on the image on the left, there are little surgical tables, you could say, and those have little bee carrying things on them, which I will zoom in on. But I also wanted to show you the little bee pictures that they have on their website and in the exhibit, because it really does emphasize how helpless these bees are. Like the bee is quite literally the size of that person's thumb. And we truly hold a lot more power over them than they hold over us. If you don't mind going to the next slide, Kelsey. So this is just a zoomed in picture of what is on the surgical table. So as a human bio major, I really like the fact that there is a human equivalent to this in an emergency room. So the little cube is like the room in an ER, and there's obviously syringes, tongue depressors, and you can see like little arrows showing what the different things are. So there's pollen, there's pollinated nectar, and there's honey. And you can also see on the right that there is a form to fill out. So in the exhibit, there are several stories of different bees, and not all of them have happy endings, unfortunately. But one of the biggest problems that bees really suffer from is hypothermia, because once they get hypothermic, their wings no longer work, and they struggle to fly. So we actually did have take-home kits at the museum, and you can kind of also see what that looks like in the next slide. So these take-home kits are designed to help bees in an emergency situation. So if you see a bee on the ground, you don't squish it, of course, but it may be suffering from hypothermia. And what you really want to do is there's a container. In this kit, it has a little lid, so you want to carefully scoop the bee up in the container and use this syringe to give it some pollinated nectar. And in this picture, it's a solid, it's not a liquid. So you want to put some kind of water in it so that it dissolves. And you really want to be careful because they're so small. But the idea is that because if we make people aware of how to take care of the bees, that we can help better rescue them and save them. And in the next slide, there is a little video of people taking care of a bee and a patient scenario. So like I said, a lot of times bees suffer from hypothermia. And I think one of the best things about this is that they give bees names, which I think is very sweet, but they really are extremely helpless in this situation. So they're kind of putting them in a little box, and then putting it in an environment where it feels like it's at home, so that it doesn't necessarily freak out, because we want the bee to be comfortable and feel like that it's not in an unsafe environment, so that it is able to get the proper treatment that it needs. But really it just needed a warm space, and the bee just perked right up. So it really does go to show how even the smallest of things can help our bees and really help our environment as a whole. And thank you for listening. That was about the community bee clinic. And I'm going to hand it over to Kelsey.
So hello, everyone. I'm Kelsey, and first and foremost, I want to apologize. I'm in a classroom right now, and the class starts like 20 minutes after this ends. So if you see people filing in and out, that is what is going on. So I would like you to meet the piece that I am describing, or that I'm talking about today. This is called R-carbon. So R-carbon is a material made out of bio waste or human waste. So it's the product of everything that goes to a sewage treatment plant, which is then heated to 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit. So it kills all that gross, nasty stuff that we assume with biohazard material. And then is turned into these little pieces right here called nurdles. So this is what the R-carbon pieces look like when they're in their, I guess, final form of processing. And on the left, you can see this picture here. This is what the piece looks like in the museum. I like to say it's an exhibit in parts because there are different pieces to focus on. I would like to also mention that the descriptors on the wall and the black paint on the wall, the black paint on the stands in the picture are all made, the paint, the pigment, the black pigment is made from the our carbon-based dye. And all the black paint that you see in the museum besides the ceiling is made from this our carbon-based pigment. So this is the first part of the piece that I'll describe is using our carbon as a building material. So our carbon that you see on the left here in this little vial can be used to enhance building structural materials such as concrete on the right here, or used for various flooring designs. I believe when we were introduced to this, we were told that there was a winery in Oregon or something like that that used our carbon to make their flooring, like this little tile on the left here. And that made it a carbon negative building in itself. As a personal connection, my family for the past, me, my dad, and his dad before him all work currently at a cement plant in Charlevoix. And so I'm part of the HR department during summers when I'm not in school. And I actually, when I was introduced to this piece and the artists, I connected the artists with our higher ups at the cement factory in Charlevoix to hopefully try and pitch using our carbon as the carbon additive in our cement making process. As I mentioned before, this is our carbon-based dye at work. So Alex Mill, which is an offshoot of the J. Crew company, has gone into making sustainable fashion, including this jacket as their example piece right here, using that our carbon-based pigment to dye it that charcoal color. Again, making it a carbon negative fashion. So I think I'm going to leave this to a question for you guys here. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and answer my question, what do you all assume this little structure is? If I give you the context that it is based on the year 2020, and this bottom starting here is January, and this top is starting in December in relevance to climate change. If anyone wants to buzz in and answer.
I would say it has to do with the lessening of car movement, like a graph of the people moving around less in their cars.
You're actually really close. So this is based on air travel, actually, carbon emissions from air travel. So as you can see, you have the year progressing normally, and then we hit March and the pandemic shuts everything down. No one's allowed to go anywhere. And then you can see that things slowly start to progress back to semi-normal, except not nearly normal. It's not as big as the bottom is. So it's carbon emissions from airfare travel in the year 2020. And again, that 3D print was made from our carbon pigmented plastic filament from the 3D printer. And here's a little video of the next part of the piece, the last part of the piece that I will talk to you about. So it's just a little pan up of this giant tower of blocks, again, painted in our carbon pigment paint, that talks about the amount of carbon emissions the average American puts out in a week in different little aspects of life, such as you can see in this picture, air travel, natural gas. The next one. The stack of boxes is as much carbon as one American emits every week. And then I'll show you that picture in the next slide. So this is our big stack of boxes here. This is me in a little animated figure. So I am 5'11", which is tall for an average girl. This stack is taller. So this stack, if you can imagine, is about, I want to say, 1.5 feet wide, and then obviously taller than 6 feet tall. If you can take this as all CO2 in a week, take this, multiply 52, that's how much carbon an average American emits in a year. I'd like to zoom in on various boxes shown here. So what I like to talk about when I'm in the museum with guests, it's usually college students that come in, and college students like, fresh clothing. They like to go to the mall, pick out the new highest fashion, the fast fashion that'll make them cool, make them popular. However, that fast fashion comes at a price. It comes at high carbon emissions. The thing about fast fashion is that it is fast. It goes out of style quickly. What do you do with the clothing that goes out of style? It'll go in a landfill, which will then sit there and degrade or rot if it's not made out of an organic material. So what I like to talk about is like, hey, maybe instead of going to the mall and picking out that new jacket or a new t-shirt that you're going to wear for just one event, maybe go to a thrift store instead, like a Salvation Army or a Plato's Closet, and pick out something that you can get for equal or better value at less of a cost, and that has already been in the cycle and isn't part of fast fashion. So that way you can help reduce, reuse, recycle. And then the box on the right here is the transportation box. This one is our biggest of all the boxes. And we can see air travel here, which was talked about in some of the previous slides with the little 3D print. Look at the teeny tiny little public transport slide, or little public transport box. It's gorgeous and I love it so much. If we could take more of motor vehicle fuel, everybody commuting to work in just one car, one person per car, and say like, oh, I'm going to take a bus today, or I'm going to carpool or something like that. And we could maybe decrease the size of this motor vehicle fuel portion to help decrease our carbon output. If anybody has any questions for me, I think that's what we're going to now.
Kelsey, you have one question in the chat from Athena. So what exactly is negative emissions?
Yeah. So our negative emissions means that instead of putting more carbon emissions out into the atmosphere, it'll actually be sequestering carbon from the atmosphere and making it less of a carbon footprint. So there will be less carbon in the atmosphere or in the environment.
Is there any way of doing it with sustainable farming and gardening?
I believe so. I believe that was actually part of our piece that we saw at the very beginning. If I can pull back up to that.
Okay.
Hold on. This piece right here. So this one talks about using, it's called Michigan Prairie, which is the specific type of like grass agricultural feed. I think there's like some flowers, some legumes in it as well, that is very good at taking carbon out of the atmosphere and sequestering it into the roots and into the foliage of these plants. And that's been used along the sides of highways in Michigan. I think they also talked about putting it in between crop rows in mass agriculture. I think it may have been mentioned that they use it in orchards as well. So I think that should answer your question. Oh, I think you're on mute. Athena, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, yeah. What was that called again? Michigan what?
Michigan Prairie, I believe is the name.
Oh, thank you.
Actually a concept, or it's a crop that comes out of Michigan State. It is a Michigan State University product that was created here on campus.
Great, thanks so much.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions for us?
One of the things that struck me about your whole approach is sort of the blend of art and science. And it seems like that is really the creative approach to some of the problems that we face or challenges that we face, whether it's global climate change or water pollution or anything seems like would benefit from this blend of art and science. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people feel overwhelmed by climate change and kind of weighted down. And so to the extent that they could be inspired by new approaches, seems really like a positive way to move forward. So thank you for sort of introducing the way that you've approached this exhibit, which I think is really relevant to a lot of us. So it's not so much a question, but just an observation that we need to learn about these things, but we also need to be inspired and think for new solutions. So do you see kind of people lighting up and leaving hopeful when they leave the museum, or how do you gauge the success of your interactive experience here?
So actually on the other side of this wall on the right side with these little boxes, if you continue on going towards the right, there are two little whiteboards, one that says, what are your hopes for the future about climate change and what are your fears for the future about climate change? So I think those little, we call them talkback boards, are a good way for our guests, our workers, or our collaborators, anybody who comes in to sort of come in and put their thoughts on the board of like, my hope for the future is that we can save the polar bears or something like that. And then like my fear for the future of we're gonna poison our ocean so much that we're not gonna be able to have crab legs or things like that. Just various things I've seen written on the boards.
I think too, it's a mixture, right? Which I think is the power of these exhibitions or in approaching some of this work this way, is you see people that both leave more hopeful, but also sometimes I think a little bit more anxious too, of like that stack, as Kelsey pointed out, of our carbon boxes, of it really, the visual of seeing that kind of in like right in front of you makes it a lot more tangible, I think, for people too. Kind of the concept out of sight, out of mind, and this puts it very much in sight. And then I also think we see, like I remember from a class visit we facilitated a couple of weeks ago, kind of going connected to a community bee clinic actually, was a student was kind of reflecting on like, what did we notice? What did we experience going through this exhibition? And they're like, at first I just thought like, okay, it's just a honeybee, like no big deal. But that seeing that visual and seeing kind of the care and attention that went into putting those care kits together, to emphasizing the importance of honeybees to the ecosystem too, that students, like, it made me think a little bit differently about how I'm viewing bees and how I'm viewing nature. And so I think those are, to me, some of the really successful like moments, is when people are leaving, continuing to ask themselves questions, continuing to reflect on it, and continuing to engage in conversation. Because I think that's the really rich thing we see happening in the space, is people like grappling with their personal impact, with thinking of new ways that they might reduce their impact on the environment. So I think the dialogues that we see happening in the space and then outside of the space is what I would measure as success.
Just to build off of that a little bit, I think the best part is we've had class visits where people have asked me, why is it all so depressing? Because there's certain pieces that I start with that are a little bit more depressing, but I always really like to show pieces like our carbon, and people immediately are like, wow, we're actually doing something. How can I get involved? What can I do? And I personally think that is one of the best parts about having visitors in the exhibit and having them engage with us as collaborators, because they, at first, sometimes people come in like, oh, okay, cool, we're at a museum, it's an exhibit. But once they really get to know and understand the exhibit and have a dialogue with us as collaborators, it not only do we learn from them, but they also learn from us. So it's really a relationship of back and forth conversation and, in a sense, trust to understand and learn.
Thank you.
Anyone have any other questions for us?
Sure. I was curious. I mean, I really think what you're doing is fantastic, but when you get feedback, I'm curious about, do you ever run into people, which I think are still out there, that are resistant to the whole idea of climate change? I mean, those are the ones that I'm hoping we can kind of connect with. And I think there's still some of that out there.
I'll let Kelsey Hermant, do you want to weigh in on that first? Because you're more day to day on the floor of the gallery, and then I can offer some thoughts and perspective about that as well.
Armand, if you want to get that, I'm fielding a chat question at this moment in time.
Yeah, no, for sure. I saw Caroline unmuted, so I was gonna let her do her thing first. But the thing that I seen is that people are actually really open-minded when they come into the exhibit. It's not that they're always set in their beliefs. I mean, I don't think I've ever personally met a visitor that's necessarily like, I don't believe in climate change, like that's outright said that. I've had visitors question like some of the scientific concepts, like is evolution even real? Or like, how does this even work? Like, but those are the kind of good questions I'd like to say, because they're questioning like their thinking, and they're saying like, well, I don't understand this. You need to like explain this better, or you need to let me know more. And they always leave with something new, but I also always leave with something new from that conversation, because I learn about different perspectives. And I think the best way that I've connected with visitors like that is just to have an open mind and open conversation. You know, I'll be honest and say, you know, I personally believe that evolution is real, but I will also like just have an open conversation and not necessarily directly challenge their beliefs. Because I think this is really an exhibit where there are a lot of overwhelming feelings, even if you do believe in climate change. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents on that.
To expand on what Herman said, I think it's a really difficult question, right, too, because I think on one hand, as we were talking about earlier, an exhibition or an artistic experience like 1.5, because it makes some of those concepts more tangible and visible and opens a space for dialogue, is I think it has a lot of potential to persuade or to think about kind of climate a little bit differently. But it's also tricky in the sense that I think someone who's deeply, deeply resistant to the notion that humans are impacting climate, to some of that data, that's a really hard question, because they're also not necessarily the people that are going to walk or choose to spend their free time in that space. And so I think what Herman said is really important, is that like when we do encounter kind of a little bit of like, no, it can't really be that much of an impact, that's a space for dialogue and conversation, and that's, I think, what I really love about the collaborator model and some of the CoLab studio exhibitions is it's grappling. Our exhibition before this actually was about surveillance. It was called Tracked and Traced. And so lots of interesting like dialogues and conversation there as well. And then our upcoming exhibition will be about food security. And so those are topics that kind of invite debate and conversation and dialogue. And I think the fact that exhibition is a space to have those conversations, even if they're difficult ones, is important, because you're also not going to be able to persuade or convince anyone if you just kind of shut down that dialogue and conversation too. So I think people like Herman and Kelsey do a wonderful job in the exhibition of listening and kind of making space for that dialogue to happen, but also kind of pushing and saying like, well, like, look at this, or like, see this giant block of like our weekly carbon emissions, that hopefully make it a little bit more open, but it is a tricky question.
It's a tough issue, no doubt about it. Yeah. But it sounds like you guys are doing a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you. We really appreciate hearing that.
I think too, if you can present things in a way that without getting into the argument about climate change or anybody's beliefs, if you can show a way to reuse things and just without having, like a big sludge pile or, dump somewhere, if you can show a way that's better, that you can reuse it and just, I think sometimes you can avoid that whole belief argument.
I agree.
If you can make it more attractive to them.
Exactly. And I think we didn't talk about this piece, but one of my, I have a background in professional writing. So of course I'm going to focus on kind of the narrative. And that's what I love about exhibition experiences too, because they have a story and a narrative to them. And some of the artistic pieces, like we have a work called 1.5 Degrees of Concern, which is based on kind of the trends that we're seeing within climate data and kind of carbon emissions, but it speculates and creates these stories of 3 women around the globe that are navigating, I think it's 1952, like 2052, and then 2153. And so looking at like, if we continue on this trajectory, this is the stories of what our day-to-day lives are like. And so it's based on kind of that scientific fact, but it immerses people in story too. And I think what story invites people to do is to reflect and to think about that. I shouldn't say it's neutral because nothing is ever neutral in that space, but I think narrative also invites people to engage with content a little bit differently sometimes than data and facts. And I think that's the power of kind of an artistic approach to some of these exhibitions as well, is it's grounded in science and it's grounded in data, but it's a different presentation that can sometimes feel a little bit more accessible to people.
Great idea.
I'm curious if you've had any actual beekeepers come through with the bee hospital concept.
Ooh, I'm trying to think back. Kelsey Hermant, do you remember? I know early on, we actually did a bee clinic workshop too. So the exhibitor, Lisa, that designed that piece, did like a community bee clinic workshop that I unfortunately couldn't attend, but I think had a lot of people that were interested. And like, as Kelsey mentioned too, we had those take-home kits that we ran out of very quickly. But I don't know that we've had actual kind of beekeepers run through.
Yep, I didn't.
I'm actually.
Sorry, continue.
I'm actually a former beekeeper. I got out of it because I developed allergic reaction to bee stings. So,
oh my goodness,
and it's also pretty expensive. But if you want to start up a hive and you buy a package of bees, those are sold in like 2 pounds or 3 pound packages. So. In that case, the workers are an individual worker is pretty low priority for a beekeeper. You're looking at tens of thousands of bees in an active hive, and the worker lifespan is extremely short. So I found it kind of interesting that you're approaching it in trying to save a worker.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. And like what I would say, like the goal of a piece like that too, is just kind of that student story I mentioned earlier too, of like actually looking and reflect. It's more about that reflection of the relationship too, in some ways, than like the individual outcome as the bee. Because as Hermant mentioned, those patient records for the bees don't always have great outcomes in that space. So I think the reflective element of that is really what I personally find super intriguing around that piece of like getting people to pause and think and to notice kind of the impacts on what's happening around them.
Caroline, there's another question for you in chat.
Oh, are the exhibits archived in the museum website or on a YouTube channel? Love to see tracked and traced. So Oh, goodness. So we have, I think, a digital, I'll have to double check with our creative director. We did do a 3D scan of Tracked and Traced, but what I would engage with is a couple of things related to Tracked and Traced specifically, is we did a podcast with WDET. And so there's different episodes I can see really quickly while I'm talking, if I can find and drop the link in the chat. But those are episodes that really focus on kind of the themes that were embedded within Tracked and Traced. The museum's YouTube page also, we just archived kind of our content from that as well. So there's some recordings from some of the virtual programs that happened in that space. And let me see if I can grab Tracked and Traced really quickly. I love 1.5 Celsius too, but Tracked and Traced was one of my favorite ones, I think, that we've done.
While you're pulling that up, there's a couple of things going on in Meridian right now. We're developing a climate action plan, revising one that was started in 97. To be happy to, I would love to get some input from any of you who would like to kind of review that and offer comments. In fact, it's going to our Board of Trustees, or a portion of it's going to our Board of Trustees next week for their input. We're also working with the Earth Club of Okemos High School to do a educational booth about sustainable fashion and some of our other environmental things going on in the township next month. And we're kind of thinking about creative ways to engage the public in a conversation, but also we got so much information that we'd like to share about these topics. How do we do it in a way that's effective and engages people and is meaningful? Athena, who spoke earlier, did interviews of visitors to the farmers market and found that was fairly interesting, informative, and engaging. We can't obviously interview everyone, but just those two things, our climate action plan and engaging exhibits at our farmers market, are two things I'd love to collaborate with you on if you have ideas, or anyone else.
All right, drop 2 links in the chat. The link to the Tracked and Traced podcast, and then also to the museum website, which you can see all the upcoming programs. So we have lots of exciting things coming on. And I also should mention too, so 1.5 is open until the end of February. And then in April, we'll be having, which might also be of interest to this group. We're the first location. So the MSU Museum is a Smithsonian affiliate. And so we will be having the first location to host their Knowing Nature Stories of the Boreal Forest exhibition, which looks at climate in the boreal forest, of course, too, from an Indigenous perspective. So that will open kind of end of April. And will be on display through November of 2023. So please come and visit. Please come and visit 1.5 before it closes if you can. And then also more exhibitions upcoming in the future.
Thank you so much for being here. We have about 10 more minutes. If there's any related to topics, suggestions, questions, folks. It's been a really interesting hour. Please unmute yourself and share a comment or thought, related or not, to this conversation.
You've piqued my interest in revisiting the MSU Museum. I haven't been there since my girls were little, and not much had changed since the time that I was an undergrad there. So I'm very curious.
Well, thank you. We're really excited about, we've got a wonderful team and kind of a wonderful leader. So we're excited about what's to come in the future. I think we've been having a really great time the past 2 years.
What I really love about what you're doing is the collaboration and the invitation for communication. Because in this era of cancel culture, no matter where you are on this side, especially the things you're looking at, there is a perception that, we can't talk about any of this stuff. You have to accept it, the dialogue, right, the narrative.
Mhm.
Whereas here you are inviting communication, and I think this is truly exciting. So congratulations on that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I really, I think what you're doing there at the museum is really great, and it's so good. I kind of asked Leroy about this last week, but do you get an opportunity to collaborate with other facets of the university? Because there's exhibits in various places, and I'm just curious about how you interact with all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so part of, I think, where we've kind of restructured and refocused mission and vision. So you'll notice in that mission statement, it mentions kind of the MSU community. Of course, kind of visitors are welcome more broadly too. But that's, I think, been an area that we've been really committed to and focused on, is increasing kind of the collaboration and relationships with students, faculty, staff on campus too. So we've had wonderful partners. I actually think that's the building that Kelsey might be in right now, is over at the new STEM education facility. The deans over there, associate deans over there, are really fantastic partners to us. We kind of work with a range. We actually have in our upstairs gallery, we have right now on display for a little longer, what we call our gaming gallery, which is displaying works from MSU is a really phenomenal game design program. So we worked kind of with faculty over there to get some displays of their student games. And then lots of collaborations across departments. We just had a reception last Friday for a Sounds of Religion opening, which is co-produced with the Smithsonian by a couple of MSU faculty. So that's College of Arts and Letters, College of Natural Science. So we're really excited about all the collaborations happening around campus. And then also within, so structurally within MSU, the MSU Museum, the Wharton Center, the Broad Art Museum, and the Beale Gardens are all under Associate Provost Judith Stoddard. So she is the Associate Provost for University Arts and Collections. And I think what we've really started to see too is more conversation and dialogue around kind of how all of the different museums and cultural institutions on campus can work together and co-produce programming. We've worked kind of with the Broad in the past too. And so it's really exciting to see the directors of all of those institutions kind of talking and conversing and working together about thinking of programs that we might facilitate collectively across campus. So I think it's a really exciting, interesting time. I personally love work. As you could probably tell, I love working at the museum because there is a lot of conversation and collaboration happening. And I think there's an energy around it and advancing some of that work that's exciting to see across campus.
That's great.
I have a question. In terms of your content and stuff, I used to work for a traveling art exhibition company. So we would, curated art, exhibits, and then they would travel so that more people could see them. So is there ever a thought of continuing that on, even if it was just in Michigan, but to travel those exhibits so that more people would see them?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question for like looking at some of the open call curated exhibitions as well. Because a lot of time, like through an open call at the end of it, we have nice photos and documentation and sometimes keep some things, but a lot of the works actually go back to the exhibitors or go back to the artists. And so what I think we've started to have conversations around is kind of looking at what that means to travel those exhibitions beyond their display at the museum. So sometimes I think what we've talked about is taking a couple of pieces and putting them in different buildings around campus too that can travel in different spaces. And so I think we have a lot of interest in thinking about what it means to travel some of those too. I think we're a couple of steps maybe away from actually implementing that, but seeing like that's kind of, I think, been the conversations we've had in the CoLab studio certainly is like, how do we continue these conversations beyond the time that this is displayed? So I think hopefully we'll be experimenting with that a little bit more in the future.
Well, I know the Smithsonian has like a traveling exhibition team and stuff, so they might be able to help in terms collaborated with them.
That's what our director has mentioned for, we're a little far kind of in 1.5 to maybe look at that, but our next exhibition, which will be called Food Fight, that's, I think, something we're interested in exploring.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. And then I'm going to do one more plug because I always have to plug the museum programs when we're talking is I just dropped a link to the Food Fight open call too. So that is open for submissions until the end of March. So if you have ideas for an exhibition that focused on, or an exhibit, or even just an idea for a program, we accept program submissions too. Then please share with anybody that might be interested in sharing that work.
Well, speaking of plugs, we have a green team. We now have a green burial team. We have a food to smart recycling team. We have an energy team active in the township. These are sort of self-directed work teams that are working on some of these issues. Every week, we're trying to move some of these topics forward in the township. If any of you live in the township or are interested in more on these teams, a lot of them are here today. But just throwing that out there as sort of like the working force behind some of these visions that are emerging in our community. So thank you all for being on that effort and those efforts. And if you want more, just info, just hit me up.
That's excellent.
3 more minutes. Any more parting questions or launching questions for future conversations?
I don't have a question, but I do want everyone to know that we are working on the environmental resource list and have a plan. So hopefully we can talk more about that at an upcoming meeting.
Could you give just a 1 more minute spiel on that, Amanda?
Sure. So we found a place that we can host it on our website, and we are very interested in collecting the data, and I believe we've secured staff time to do that on an updating annual basis, which was one of our concerns with the project. Obviously, we'd like it to be a list that people can use for a long time. So we just need to work through some kinks of organization, and while a Google Doc will work for gathering the input, it will not work for the final document that is hosted on a website. So we're probably thinking that's going to be a PDF, but we can make that, change to that final document.
Great. For those of you who might not be familiar, these conversations started about 2.5 years ago with Sarah bringing up the question, what's going on in our community with the environment? I mean, who's doing things in our region? And we started to create a list, kind of a mind map, if you will. And we thank you to Amanda. We're moving forward to create a more web-based, user-friendly list of some of those groups that are doing things like this in our community. So I'll share the initial link in the chat, but thank you, Amanda, for that update.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the presentation. I'm going to go to the museum too. Sounds very exciting.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear about this and just know that this is going on, and I've got some environmental people that I'm going to be sending it to so that they will attend it as well. So I'm very excited. Thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah,
you so much for having us. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no problem. I was just going to say thank you so much. I agree. I can't wait to see the exhibit.
I want to say thank you all for including us in your time and including us in your work. We really appreciate it.
Yes, agreed. This was a great way to spend the morning.
Well, y'all have a great day and I hope you'll come back. In the future, if you got other ideas for conversations, please send them along. If you want the link to this recording, feel free to share your email in the chat or send it to me. Any other parting goodbyes, anything? Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Really
Take
appreciate
care,
it, Caroline.
everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.